Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Weather on the Go, all your weather coverage. In today's video, we'll be focusing on your March forecast, taking you week by week, talking about temperatures, precipitation, your severe weather, and also snowstorm probabilities as well. We'll be diving into those details in today's weather forecast. Before we get to that, if you do like detailed weather breakdowns across North America throughout 2024, this is the channel for you. Make sure you subscribe to the channel down below. Also press the like button down below. It helps to get all of this weather information passed along to more and more people. So let's look back here at February. Today is actually leap day, very rare. It happens every 4 years, and today is the 29th of February. But just looking back at the entirety of the month, the upper Midwest was well above normal here. This is actually going to go down as the third warmest February on record across the lower 48 here. So definitely a very warm February it was. And looking at precipitation through the month as well, it was warm in the upper Midwest, but also very dry as well up across the north and really the upper Midwest in general. The wetter areas were out west, especially here into the West Coast, off to the west in California, and across the southeastern United States as well. Very wet conditions through the month of February. And when we look at our total precipitation anomalies through the month, generally along and east of the Mississippi River, we were drier than normal. And west of the Mississippi, especially out here to the Rockies and into California, very wet. Some areas in California ended up around 5-6 inches above average, especially near the Los Angeles and Santa Barbara area for February. And looking at our snowfall as well through the month, you can see very dry with our snow across the upper Midwest. That warmth was noticeable because that did melt our snowpack, and we didn't have much opportunity for snow because of that warm weather. Across the Northeast, the I-95 corridor, we did start February with a snowstorm, so we saw some snow there. But even for those areas, we didn't see much. A lot of the snow was across the west, into the Rockies, into the Cascades, and especially the Sierras down here with that active subtropical jet. So now let's look here at what we call your Nino index. And this is a chart that essentially just shows whether you're in El Nino, ENSO neutral, or a La Nina phase. And right now, positive, that means we are in an El Nino. Whenever you're above plus 1.0, you're in at least a weak El Nino. And we're at plus 1.147 here as of now. And we are getting closer towards ENSO neutral conditions as we get closer towards the spring months here. And then as you go down into negatives, that would be a La Nina. We're currently not in that right now. So as we look at the consolidation of all the climate models that we do have out there, it tends to keep us through the month of March in at least a weak El Nino. But we are starting to slowly trend towards an ENSO neutral phase, so that is something we'll keep an eye on as we do get closer towards April and May. But for March, we are going to be continuing to be in a weak El Nino phase. And you can see that here across the equatorial Pacific Ocean. This is where we look. The warmer anomalies essentially will be El Nino. And when you have more of those colder anomalies, that would be La Nina here. And when you're near average, those would be ENSO neutral conditions. So you can see the warmer anomalies here, that does signal El Nino. Now, these aren't as deep as reds as what we saw just a couple of months ago. So the El Nino is weakening, but still we're above normal here. And during a typical El Nino pattern here, we've saw this much of the winter. This does continue. Very inactive polar jet stream to the north. So not a lot of storm systems coming in from Canada. That keeps us warm over the top here across Alaska and the Aleutian Islands, western and southern Canada, and the northern tier of the United States. And then the opposite happens. We have more of the active subtropical and Pacific jet stream underneath with an active low pressure storm track. This leads to cooler conditions, but also active weather with wet weather across the Southwest, much like we saw in California and across the southern U.S. in general during a typical El Nino pattern. So what do we see as we go through week by week here in March? So the first week in March, the 1st through the 8th time frame, we are setting up up high pressure mainly across eastern Canada and the eastern US. That means our active storm track will likely remain out west across western Canada, but more so across the western United States. This also means that our temperatures along and east of the Great Plains will be likely above normal, possibly even seeing record highs continuing into early March, especially for the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, and into the northeast New England region, west out here into the Rockies, the Pacific Northwest, the Pacific Southwest, and Western Canada, we're likely going to see below normal, possibly well below normal temperatures during the first week in March. And looking at our precipitation trends as well, it's looking to remain very active with that active subtropical jet out west, very active across the west here for Washington State, Oregon, and especially Northern California. More heavy snow coming in for the Sierras with this. And underneath, we have that active storm track, and that will mean more precipitation for the Gulf Coast states, the southeast, and up through the East Coast. Drier conditions will persist across the middle of the country. Looking at the snowfall trends during the first week in March, a lot of that cold air aloft will remain out west. So the Rockies continue to see that, the Cascades up here into Washington and Oregon, and also the Sierras down in California, likely seeing the bulk of the snow through the first week of March. That active snow track, though, will be well to the north, so mainly into southern Canada here, southern Saskatchewan, southern Manitoba, into northern Ontario during this time frame. But as we flip into the second week in March, the 8th through the 15th time frame, there's more of a wintry look, especially out west here. We have a blocking high pressure likely up here toward Greenland and northeastern Canada. That will force the storm track further south, and you can see the colder anomalies here. That cold air will remain out west across the Rockies and the western third of the country. We're still warm above average across the upper Midwest, the Ohio Valley, the Great Lakes, and the Northeast, and much of southern and southeastern Canada. Looking at precipitation here, still very wet out west, especially there again for Washington State, Oregon, and especially northern, perhaps even central California into the second week of the month. And it starts to get more active east of the plains, into the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, much of the southeast, and up the East Coast during this period. That could lead to a couple severe weather events. And then looking at the northwest side of these low pressure systems tracks, we will see more of the snowfall try to move further south from Canada into the northern US. Now, this is a low confidence forecast because the European weeklies were showing this several times through the month of February and they did not verify. So this is a low confidence forecast, but there is some chance that we could have some snow showers at least, maybe some accumulating snow across the northern tier of the United States and southeastern Canada into the second week in March. Now the third week, now we're getting into the second half of the month here, the 16th through the 23rd. This is more of a wintry look across the lower 48. We have more below normal heights. Now with that said, we are still in March, so the sun angle is higher, so these below normal anomalies won't be as cold as say where we would have those in January. So it's a little bit different here in March, but just giving you an idea, much of the lower 48 will likely see at least some degree of below normal temperatures during the third week in March here, and an active storm track setting up here across the southeast. Notice the west, we start to dry off a little bit. Still seeing some storms out here, but mainly transitioning those across the eastern U.S. and the southeastern U.S. during this period. And there you go, to the northwest side of those low pressure tracks, still the chance of snow showers and even some accumulating snow across the northern tier of the United States and southeastern Canada, and possibly cold enough for some wet snowfall across interior New England during this period. And finally, during the last week of the month of March, the 23rd through the 31st, this transitions from out across the west and moves east with those below normal heights. We start to see more ridging in Alaska, western Canada, and the Pacific Northwest. So we'll see more cooler weather transitioning from the west, moving eastward here, and even though it shows blue across the Pacific Northwest, with that ridge beginning to build out here potentially into the last week of the month, we could actually start to see this flip to above normal with our temperatures toward the last week in March there. And looking at the storm track, yes, still some storms out west, but likely seeing more of these active storms across the southeast and up the east coast with this El Nino pattern. And again, to the northwest of those storm tracks, we're likely to see at least some snow showers and possibly some accumulating snow, many of the same areas here throughout the month of March. So looking at this all together, here is what the Climate Prediction Center did come up with the March 2024 forecast as a whole. When you average all 31 days out, above normal temperatures can be expected across the Pacific Northwest and the Northeast respectively, but really much of the northern tier of the United States continuing to look like an El Nino pattern with more of those above normal temperatures. Equal chances across the Central Plains and the Missouri Valley here, and then below normal temperatures likely across the Southwest, the South, and the Southeast during this period throughout the month of March. Looking at the precipitation forecast, it's dry in the Pacific Northwest, it's dry in the upper Great Lakes and down here into portions of West Texas. This could actually get down into the Rio Grande Valley with the drier weather. And then we have that active storm track here through California, through Nevada, and getting in through the Rockies and into the Central Plains. And then with that active subtropical jet, the main flow will be down here across the southeast, especially through Florida and the southeast coast during the month of March. So now let's look here a little bit deeper into the sea surface temperature anomalies into the Gulf of Mexico. And when we're talking about severe weather, we have to look at some of these sea surface temperatures and sea surface temperature anomalies, because as we go deeper into March, you start to see warmer waters here in the Western Gulf, and that could be pulled northward here with these stronger low pressure systems that develop across the mainland U.S., and that would increase our dew point temperatures further north as we have that moisture coming from the Gulf of Mexico moving northward. So going back to showing you the El Nino pattern here, warmer temperatures over the top across southern Canada and the northern U.S., wetter and cooler across the south, but that doesn't all eliminate the severe weather risk altogether. Looking at two scenarios here. Scenario number one, a low pressure storm track across the desert southwest here as they move inland from California, and then across the southern U.S. here, and that would keep a lot of our low-pressure storm tracks further south. So the severe weather threat and the associated warm sector of these storms will likely be over here into the southeast and into the southeast coast. Scenario number two, we could have low-pressure systems moving inland to California, but also ripping further north. It was as we have stronger low-pressure systems, much like we saw the other day where we had northern Illinois and parts of the Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, seeing some severe weather and tornadoes. We could have a triple point setup or two later into March where we could start to see potentially more severe weather further north with one or two of these storms. So that is something to keep an eye on. So with putting all of that data together, here is what I came up with my severe weather forecast for March 2024. Two distinct corridors here for elevated storm potential that could turn severe. One down here with the main area of interest across Dixie Alley and really right near the Gulf Coast. You have easy access to those Gulf of Mexico waters there. Those dew points will easily be into the 50s and 60s in this area. So a stronger low pressure system across the south will easily produce severe weather in March down here. Further to the north, we're depending on seeing more of these triple point setups potentially in March. So an elevated area of concern in the Midwest and the southwestern Great Lakes region here, really centered on northern Missouri, Iowa, and northern Illinois here in this setup for March. That will be something to keep an eye on, but I will tell you that the northern mode here in the orange is likely to be just one or two storms. We're not going to see all month long severe weather across this region. The frequent severe weather will likely remain across the deep south during that period. Looking at snowstorm probabilities as well, March we still see snowfall here. Anywhere in the light blue, you have essentially a 0 to a 25% chance of snow, and that favors the Midwest, the Central Plains, back to the Rockies, and then all the way up here through the Great Lakes and interior New England here. And then the medium blue has a 25 to a 50% chance of snow here and snowstorms, especially for eastern Montana, northern and northeastern Wyoming through the Dakotas into north central Minnesota and far northern Wisconsin. If we have some of those stronger low pressure storm tracks across these areas with that triple point setup like I was talking talking about with the severe weather, the northwest side of those lows could pull in enough cold air aloft with the cold air advection and turn that rain over to snow on the northwest side, and that would be more favored across the far northern plains and the far upper midwestern regions throughout the month of March. So hopefully you guys took a lot of stock in my forecast here, and hopefully it verifies, as I do put these forecasts together for you guys with the most accuracy as possible. And if you like accurate weather forecasts throughout the year here across North America, make sure to hit the subscribe button down below. Also press the like button down below so we get more of this weather information passed along to more and more people. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their leap day.